This RealAg Radio podcast is brought to you by Intruvix 2 Herbicide from FMC. Intruvix 2 Herbicide is an all-in-one formulation that gives you the best of both worlds, fast-burning activity and long-lasting systemic action for more consistent broadleaf control pre-seed to cereals. See your local retailer today.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio.
Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Shaun Haney, your host here on this Wednesday edition of the show. Hey, thanks so much, everybody, for making RealAg Radio and Rural Radio 147 a big part of your workday. Also, a huge shout out to everybody listening today on the RealAg Radio podcast. Podcast listeners, you're going to get an extended version of today's show. So please, if you're listening on Rural Radio, check out the podcast as well. I'm broadcasting today, this midweek edition of the show, from Minot, North Dakota. Yesterday, I presented to the Northern Pulse growers here in Minot. Had a great time, great interaction with the audience, fantastic questions. And today, I'm down at the farm show. Yes, Northern Pulse Growers is having me speak to the farm show audience. I'm on the keynote stage here today. Looking forward to that at the Kmart Farm Show. I've never been to it. Looking forward to it. It's supposed to be a big show. It's I've heard a lot about it, so I'm looking forward to being down there at the program. And next week, it's hard to believe, I'm going to be in Toronto earlier in the week with CCAN and talking to a bunch of their soybean dealers. And then we're off to CattleCon. We're going to Nashville, baby. Hopefully they've recovered from some of the winter weather they've been experiencing here the past week. I was talking to the people at RFD TV today as I do a morning appearance there every day, and they were saying trees are down and they are everywhere. It's a mess. It is going to be epically hard to clean all up. So stay safe out there. Stay safe out there, everybody. Indeed. Today on the program, we're going to hear an interview that Kelvin Hepner of RealAgriculture did with Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe. Looking forward to that. It was recorded the end of last week when he returned from China. So looking forward to hearing that. We're also going to have a product spotlight with Syngenta Canada. We've got Norm Sutherland here today to talk about 25 years of innovation. Looking forward to hearing that. Laura Eastwood with KWS is going to talk about the feed value and the opportunity for hybrid rye in your rotation when it comes to feeding your livestock. That's going to be great. And we've also got Susan Stroud from Noble Marketing. So looking forward to talking to Susan. We're going to talk some biofuels with her. We're going to talk about markets, but also biofuels. We had President Trump in Iowa last night giving a speech. He talked about E15. He said he would sign the bill if it is presented to him. We kind of pushed it or punted it off to Congress, to Speaker Johnson and Senate Leader or Majority Leader Thune. And he said they're very close on negotiating a deal that's going to work for everybody, the consumer, the refiners, the energy industry, and farmers. We'll see if that happens, but we'll get Susan's reaction to that as well. As we're also expected soon to hear from the EPA and Treasury when it comes to 45Z. And will Canada have a RIN discount or not? That's something I've been following very closely, and you should be too. We're going to hear from Susan on that. So we got a lot of stuff to chat about today on the show. Now, if you have any feedback, we'd love to hear from you. Send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also call or text the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Let's take a break. When we come back, we've got Premier Moe standing by right after this. It's now time for a park spotlight with Grain Fox, joined right now by the CEO and founder, Mark Lepp.
So with Sanoa, what we've done is built an additional layer of supports. Really what it does then is helps both producers and agribusinesses dive deeper by asking questions and getting instant answers, really to help them understand what it all means for them specifically, and so that they can make better informed decisions.
What makes Sanoa different from some of those other things that producers are already using?
Unlike generic tools like a ChatGPT or something like that, Sanoa is built for ag using ag data. And really, like a generic, whether it's ChatGPT or other ones that are on the marketplace, they typically have a delay in the most recent information that it has access to, and Sanoa is live, it's current, and it's accurate.
So Mark, if somebody wants more information on Sanoa and the entire service offering that Grain Fox has for producers, where do they go?
You can go to grainfox.ca/realag and try it for yourself.
Thinking about Plant 2026 CDC Evident Durum from Alliance Seed is the clear choice with everything today's durum producers are looking for. High grain yield, strong disease resistance, and excellent end-use suitability. Built with resistance to leaf, stem, and stripe rust, along with protection against loose smut and common bunt, CDC Evident delivers the reliability and marketability growers need and the performance they expect. Learn more at allianceseed.com or call 1-877-270-2890.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio. Get instant answers to your grain marketing questions 24/7. Sanoa is your AI grain market analyst, available anytime to help you understand prices, basis, and market trends so you can act with confidence. Oh, we got to act with confidence. That's the key, to have a plan and act with confidence when it comes to grain marketing in this kind of environment. You can start a free trial and unlock RealAg listener savings at grainfox.ca/RealAg. That's grainfox.ca/RealAg for all of our Canadian and American audiences of RealAg Radio. Okay, what we're going to hear now is an interview that Kelvin Hepner of RealAgriculture recorded with Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe. Now, this was last Friday. Okay, so this is last week. This is before President Trump did all the Truth Social about the 100% tariffs, and then Treasury Secretary Bissett said, no, it's only if there's a free trade deal with China. So just remember the context. But Kelvin does a great job talking to Premier Moe about the trip to China, the why, the what, and all the kind of. We'll try to get some answers here. Here is Kelvin Hepner and Premier Moe.
We're pleased to now welcome Premier Moe to join us here on RealAg and RealAg Radio. Thanks, Premier, for making time for us here at RealAgriculture.
Yeah, but thank you, Kelvin, for making some time for me. And I got back and I just got home here actually last night. So nice to be home.
Tell us about the trip and I guess what went down. When did it become clear that there was potential for progress on reducing these tariffs? And from a Saskatchewan perspective, certainly canola and peas, it's been a big deal.
Well, every market's a little different. And when you negotiate with the Chinese, and I can get into some of what's changed there the last few months, but you essentially negotiate right to the last minute. So I knew we were close because we've been part of the conversations all along, in particular since last September when we were there with the Parliamentary Secretary, Cody Blois. So I knew we were close. I knew, and I felt we were going to get somewhere. And, I was pleased with where we did land. It really, I think, does two things. One, it restores trade that we had 1 and 2 and 3 years ago, largely, save for pork. We did know beef was going to likely come in a few days, and it did. So that's a positive. But that's step one, is restoring our market access for canola. And I know there's lots in the bins here across the province, and hopefully that will flow sooner rather than later. The second thing it does is it opens up some avenues to grow our trade relationship with China. And I would say in particular with energy products, oil and gas, and second to that, forestry products. And ironically, I think a strategic conversation around EV production manufacturing as well. So a good agreement all in all, restoring ag trade and providing some opportunities for additional trade.
What's your understanding of the timeline of this tariff relief? In some of the context, it's been explained as only promised till the end of 2026. What would it take to have it extended beyond that, or is this just a temporary bit of relief in the meantime?
I think this is a new normal. You're going to see, rather than multinational, multi-country trade deals on a number of sectors, you're going to see specific sector trade deals between two countries time and time again. And so engagement is going to be paramount wherever we are in the world. And this is, the new normal, and it's much less certain than maybe what we're used to in the years gone by. It's kind of every industry and every country for themselves for at least the foreseeable future. And so we're going to have to be in those markets. And it's more important now than ever for us to be in those markets. And I would say I've had lots of issues with the former prime minister, and still some issues with this one and the Liberal government as well. However, his priority in increasing Canada's credibility in that international stage, that's not one. That's something we support. We've asked for a long time. We support it, and we'll support it by being in those markets with them to leverage the contacts and relationships that we have. And so I would say when it comes to international trade, we can be thankful. It's still a person-based business, and relationships matter. And we've prioritized that from a provincial perspective. We welcome the new priority that the federal government's putting on it, because it is going to be critical in how we're going to be moving forward. Because I truly think the way we're going to trade over the next 2 to 3 years is going to be very, very different than what we've been used to the last 2 to 3 decades.
Speaking of kind of that sector by sector or commodity by commodity approach, frequently, you're well aware in Western Canada, there's this feeling that federal decisions, when push comes to shove, tend to tip toward what Central or Eastern Canada wants. Is this a clear exception to that, where the Carney government leaned toward canola and peas and agricultural exports over the auto sector?
Well, it would appear to be an exception from what we've seen in the past. I hope it's, part of the new normal in realizing, what industries are actually employing people, driving the economy, creating wealth for Saskatchewan and Canadian families. And I hope that Prime Minister Carney, in his financial background, has an understanding of, what is actually driving our economic opportunities today in Canada, and ensuring that those industries can operate. And then also, I think, where our growth opportunities are. And, our immediate growth opportunities in this province, it's oil and gas, it's mining, but it's also in the value-added agricultural production. And we see some of that happening with, getting into the oil and meal as opposed to canola seed. And we see some of the pea protein fractionation conversations. Those are real opportunities for us to sell higher value products into markets around the world. And I would just say this too, is more strategically in that trade-based conversation. When you're dealing with trade conversations around ingredients versus raw agri-food products, that's often a different conversation with those countries, and it comes with a more positive outcome. So it's an uncertain world. It really is, and it's going to take a lot of work in the months and years ahead for us to preserve our market access. And I hope that what we saw here is the new norm on a federal government recognizing industries that are 100% creating value in our Canadian communities. I'm concerned on my return because and we'll likely talk about this, but some of the changes that I see in the public service specific to agriculture and agri-food Canada, that maybe the message isn't as concretely accepted as I had hoped.
Mm-hmm. I'll ask you about that in a moment here, but I think we do need to also talk about the U.S. and the potential reaction from the U.S. and how that ultimately, when we're measuring this China deal, the impacts that it could potentially have, the full impact, also needs to account for how the U.S. responds to it. And are you or were you, maybe are you still concerned the U.S. hammer could drop on Canada working more closely with China?
I think I share many people's concern in, what the President of the United States is going to say every morning. And whether it's, preempted or whether it's precipitated by something else that happens in the world, a speech in Davos or whatever that might be. I have that concern each and every morning. That being said, we need to take care of ourselves. And this is restoring market access that we had in China. They are our second largest trading partner. And so we can't walk around on eggshells each and every day thinking that, we're going to do something that's going to, upset the U.S. president or administration. We need to work with them, and we need to be at the table. And I've been down there numerous times meeting with, some of President Trump's secretaries and ambassadors. But we very much in this changing, uncertain trade environment that I described earlier, we need to be bullish. We need to take care of ourselves in the markets that matter. And for us in this province, that's 160 countries around the world. And so, a significant undertaking. So we have to be aware. I do worry about it. But it's in the way that these America first, we need to be Canada first, and we need to be Saskatchewan first here too.
Mm-hmm. Have you spoken to your colleague from Ontario? I need to ask you that too.
I haven't since I got back, but I do speak to him, a time or two a week, as general, and I'll be out there this week, so I'll see him for sure and probably give him a call maybe over the weekend. There are some opportunities, ironically, and listen, Premier Ford, I consider him a friend, good friend, and, he represents his constituents and, the auto industry that's, there. Ironically, and I'll talk to him about this, in this agreement, when you start to dig into it, there is an opportunity, I think, for a real conversation on what, if we're going to get into the EV manufacturing business, what that's going to look like. The auto industry did this 30 or 40 years ago when we had, cheaper imports coming in at, I think, Toyota, Honda, those types of things. Datsun, I remember back when I was, younger. The government created an environment where you had to assemble and manufacture a certain number of those vehicles in Canada in order to have market access here. And I think that's likely the next conversation that the federal government's looking for. And so the auto industry itself is morphing. That's why it's at the center of our USMCA discussions and such. It's morphing globally. And we have to position ourselves for what that industry is going to look like moving forward. And I'm sure Premier Ford will be part of that discussion with the federal government, and we'll be part of it as well.
A few minutes ago, you referred to Prime Minister Carney's, I believe it was, credibility on the international stage. You've been pretty complimentary of the Prime Minister's actions over the last week or two, it feels like, and I think we're maybe more used to a combative relationship or more combative relationship between Saskatchewan and the federal Liberal government. Maybe this is more of a personal question, Premier, but why the change in tone in terms of how you're speaking of the federal government lately?
Well, he in this case, he got us back to the trade relationship that we had 1, 2, 3 years ago. The previous fellow wouldn't have done that. I can say that with, quite a bit of confidence. He just wouldn't have placed the priority, been able to, manage through the necessary negotiations that happened. And credit to Cody Blois, as he was a continuous face throughout that when we first visited in last September to try to breathe some ambition into this, into these negotiations. So I'm political for sure, but I do try to call them as I see them. And from an economic perspective, and raising our credibility in that international sphere, there's a lot more priority under this fellow as opposed to the previous fellow. I joke, I call him he who should not be named, but it's not about friendships and we're good on everything. There's some policies that we have some very distinct differences with the federal government as well. However, when we require market access and we require a federal government to be able to make those nation to nation agreements like we saw, I need a prime minister and I only have one to work with. And if he's trying to get to the same place I am, and he's able to get there, I have no problem, pointing out that he made the effort. And I've had a number of years where that effort wasn't made, so I do appreciate that.
All right, that makes a lot of sense. Finally, you alluded to it earlier, but we're digging into cuts to Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. Notices went out on Thursday to affected employees, and it sounds like there could be some closures of programs and facilities in Saskatchewan. Your reaction to this move, which isn't entirely unpredicted, but still, when it hits, certainly it's drawing reaction. Your thoughts on what this could mean?
Disappointed. A number of research firms that have provided, I think, some great value in the space of, applied research, whether it be in crops, agronomic practices, some of our grasslands management as well. So I have some real concerns with what I see happening, or am hearing about happening. So we're just digging into what it actually is ourselves. I'm going to be in Ottawa later this coming week. We have some meetings out there with the premiers and with the Prime Minister as well. And I think it's fair to, ask some questions on, what the intent is here. And if it's simply a workforce reduction or a lowering of, public FTEs, there's some other places where they could save a significant amount more money. And I'd look to the gun grab for one. If you want to save a few $1 billion, that'd be a good place to start and maybe leave some of the agricultural applied research supports in place. There's been some really valuable information and research that's been done at our research farms that have, I think, in many ways, been contributed to Saskatchewan having, a global leading agricultural production system. And we do, whether it be from an environmental perspective, a carbon perspective, an ethical perspective, and how we produce our food here. We can be very proud of that. And this is in part due to the work that comes from, these organizations. So we're just digging into it ourselves, and we'll have some questions, and I'm sure Minister Merritt will have some questions of the federal minister as well.
All right. Yeah, certainly lots to dig into and developments to follow on that front, and discussions to have around that, as well as on the more geopolitical international trade front as well. So certainly we appreciate your time and look forward to our next conversation here, Premier Mo.
Take care, Kelvin, and reach out anytime and stay warm.
Yes, thank you. You too.
That was Kelvin Hepner of Real Agriculture talking to Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe about last week's trip to China. Of course, opening up agricultural exports back with China again, reducing those agricultural tariffs because Canada has reduced the tariff on Chinese EVs coming into the country. And of course, after the fact, then we saw some of the blowback from the White House, which I think we should expect. I don't think we should be surprised by that. Where we go from here in trying to secure and get through this review of the USMCA CUSMA agreement, those are questions that we'll definitely be talking a lot more about on RealAg Radio here, of course, as the weeks and months proceed. We're going to take a break. We've got more RealAg Radio coming up right after this.
Introducing a new supergroup in your fields, Averio herbicide from FMC. The first product in Western Canada to combine Group 27 and Group 14 actives, Averio herbicide delivers powerful, broad-spectrum burn-off control of early-season broadleaf weeds, including resistant kochia, cleavers, and volunteer canola. This rising star in burn-off innovation works in all soil zones and can be applied pre-seed or up to 3 days post-seeding. Ask your retailer about new Averio herbicide from FMC.
While some cereal growers believe a pre-seed or spring application of Paradigm-Free herbicide is better, others think you get more from a fall application. But what they both agree on is the exceptional broadleaf control of Paradigm-Free, the convenience of being able to apply in cooler conditions, and its role as an effective resistance management tool. Paradigm-Free, eliminate tough broadleaf weeds before they can become bigger problems. Talk to your local retailer today.
Time to get excited about your fields again thanks to Excite Bio Yield Plus. It's a phosphate-solubilizing ag biological that works on oilseeds, cereals, and legumes. For 15 years, we've been helping farmers achieve healthier plants and higher yields with our premium liquid inoculants. For more information on Excite Bio Yield Plus or one of our other premium products, call 1-855-948-3246 or visit excitebio.ca. That's XITEBIO.ca. At Excite Bio, inoculants and ag biologicals, it's all we do.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. It is time for a product spotlight with Syngenta Canada. We're joined by one of Syngenta Canada's district managers, Norm Sutherland, based out of Guelph, Ontario. How are we doing today, Norm?
Doing great, Sean. Good to see you.
A lot of experiences you have had growing up out Western Canada, working in the West, but as well as Central Canada and the East. It's hard to believe, a bit of a blur here. 25 years of Syngenta, which I remember still when the company came together and was formed. Time flies, man.
Time flies. It's been a day or two since I was calling on your dad talking about Achieve and Touchdown in Picture Butte.
Yeah, no kidding. Okay, so what are some of, we look at like 25 years of Syngenta and 25 years, tied to innovation, which is really, the business of Syngenta to try to provide some solutions for farmers. What are some of the technologies that you think in those 25 years have really made an impact, not just for the company, but obviously for the customer?
Yeah, well, 25 years, there's been quite a few. I think if I go back to the very beginning of Syngenta as a sales rep based in Lethbridge there, I think one of the cool ones right out of the start of Syngenta was the azoxystrobin and Quadris. More we had it on the market, but we got a label for rhizoctonia for potatoes. And that was a major issue back then because for quality, especially on chipping potatoes, that made a big difference. At the same time, that product was used a lot with the evolving chickpea and lentil market in Saskatchewan. And then, not too long afterwards, Western Canada, we launched Prenoxin or Axial. That was unique Group 1 at the time. Still, pretty solid product today. And, there's a bunch more, but I think more recently in the last several years, it's really the Mirvis brands and the Adepidum molecule. I mean, that's really provided a good, solid fusarium control in cereals and corn. And I think what's proven out on fungicides and that molecule is that wet or dry, you see a return. And I don't think we necessarily thought that early on when in the fungicide days.
Yeah. With all three of those examples, is there a common thread? Like it was some sort of significant improvement over what had been there before? Or is there anything to pull out of if we look at the commonality amongst those three examples?
I certainly think all three of those is why they resonate with me, because they were a bit more of a step change from what was on the market previously or what was available. Many other things are nuances or incremental change, but those were more significant, I guess, in my mind from my experience.
Okay, so that's the past, and let's get to the current here. How has technology evolved to meet the changing needs of the market? There's more complex issues out there. Weed resistance and pests are coming out of all over the place and trying to attack our yield and rob us of our return. So how has the technology evolved?
Well, I think the technology evolved as we've had these individual AIs, and then we've evolved them into different premixes. Like I think of, especially seed treatments across the country. Specifically in Ontario, I think of difenoconazole, which was Dividend. XLRTA was one of the main components. That provided an individual, like dwarf bunt was an issue still today that provided a solution. But then over time, we've integrated other AIs into seed treatments, with Vibrance Quattro across the country. And, in soybeans, same thing. The challenge when I was talking to Farm the other day is that seed treatments, we've moved, especially, speak to corn and bean market, we're trying to plant corn and beans at the same time. And it's a tight planting window. There's no perfect day to plant every farm or every quarter section. So I think that's expanded the planting window. And, we are now at the point, we're launching Victrado Complete this year. We have 5 AIs in one seed treatment. So I think it's evolved. I think the other example, my direct experience here is in Ontario is also in the corn market. We launched Mesotrione or Callisto. At the same time, resistance management was starting to be talked about as it moved to glyphosate-tolerant corn. And over the last number of years, Callisto or Mesotrione has kind of been integrated with other active ingredients to create products like Halix, Acuron, and then we're launching Storin this year with another new AI. And it's sort of completing, the solution depending as the pests evolve, resistance management concerns evolve to provide the continuity and what the farmers need, which is good solid weed control or disease control, and reduce the risk and create the yield.
Yeah, we've been talking about the 25 years of innovation. Of course, the innovation doesn't stop at 25. Obviously, you're thinking about the next 25. But particular to 2026, what's new?
Well, specifically in talk about the row crop market, corn and bean market, we're launching Storin. It's a corn herbicide, little enhanced control for water hemp and bluegrass. Also, Victrado Complete as a soybean seed treatment, as another incremental new active ingredient involved there. And in Western Canada, we're bringing Plenazone active ingredient is a brand for a wireworm, and also a lattice, era, and lentils. And we do have a potato product, Doronus Advance. So those are sort of 5 of the ones that are coming new for 26.
Okay, so if somebody wants more information, I guess, who do they talk to? Where do they go? Where are the resources?
Well, nowadays, with everybody carrying around a mini computer in their hands, they go syngenta.ca for the fundamental facts, label rates, pests on the label, that type of thing. And then local retailer and or commercial treater.
Awesome stuff. Hey, Norm, thanks so much for joining us here today. Really do appreciate it. And enjoy the rest of winter, man.
Thank you very much.
As much as we all enjoy winter in Canada. We'll be back on RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, right after this quick break.
There's power, and then there's superpower. advancing the unstoppable superpower of pre-seed from New Farm. Take control. Eliminate weed competition and start clean in spring. Manage weeds early in canola, cereals, and pulses. Conquer, Goldwing, Thunderhawk, and Blackhawk EVO. Convenient formulations and multiple modes of action. Add more power to glyphosate, more benefits to your burn down. Go to newfarm.ca/burndown.
Since 2009, the Canola School on RealAgriculture.com has been providing relevant and timely agronomic advice to anyone involved in canola production. With over 15 years of video content on YouTube, the Canola School has been producers' go-to source for canola agronomy, research, marketing, and more. The Canola School is brought to you by BASF and Invigor Hybrid Canola. Check us out on YouTube or at canolaschool.com.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio. Let's talk markets because there's a lot happening, especially in the markets tied to the biofuel space. Lots happening. And we're going to talk to Susan Stroud of Noble Ag, who I think is in an airport somewhere in the U.S., Michigan. Correct, Susan?
I think they all start to run together. I know I'm in the States, yes.
Yeah, okay, good. Hey, well, the Detroit airport's got some fabulous sushi because of all the Japanese automakers that come in and out of there. So great food in the Detroit airport. Let's, I guess, last night we heard the president speak in Iowa. He mentioned E15. If attached to it, though, if it gets to his desk, he will sign it. Did he punt the football over to Senate Majority Leader Thune and House Speaker Johnson? Like, should we feel more confident we're going to get E15 year round now?
I really think that probably the more important piece of it, or looking at it from a producer perspective. So let me back up. I feel like, and you probably feel the same way, that you've heard more about E15 over the course of the past month or so than maybe we have over the past few years combined. So it's gaining momentum, and to be clear about what we're talking about, it is allowing the year-round nationwide sale of E15. When we're talking about ethanol, every percent matters. So using 2024 numbers with our blend rate, our annual blend rate has been a 10.4 or so. And when you look at a 1% increase in blend, that's adding additional corn ethanol demand. That's the equivalent of North Dakota's entire corn crop each year. So it's nearly 500 million bushels of demand. But the biggest piece of this, and I think one thing that a lot of people tend to overlook, is really the reality of the situation. This isn't something that just happens overnight. I mean, it feels like we're finally headed the right direction, where we will see approval for nationwide sales year round. But the big piece of it is, when you consider right now that U.S. ethanol plants, I mean, we're already running at a fairly high capacity anyway. We've broken, I believe it's 3 or 4 weekly records for corn ethanol production this marketing year alone. And so that tells you, the industry is already taking advantage of the capacity that it has. And implementation of something like this, it doesn't just happen overnight. There are a lot of infrastructure challenges that have to be met. So while longer term, yeah, this is a great thing for U.S. corn ethanol, we also need to keep it in perspective, because E15 will not fix today's carryout problems. It's a long-term play. And I think a lot of people lose sight of that. And I think there's just a lot of misconceptions in general, especially with the producer crowd, because what are we talking about today? We're talking about, we have a record 17 billion bushel corn crop this year, and we have prices that the producer is not satisfied with. And so I think a lot of people look at this as a saving grace. And while it's important longer term, it's not something that fixes the balance sheet today.
Not a magic bullet. Any idea? Because sometimes increased demand doesn't bring higher prices, unfortunately. So if this does happen, what does it add to the corn price, or does it?
I think it's very dangerous to now. If I was speaking on behalf of a biofuel trade association or something like that, I'm sure they've done the math and the way that it lifts corn prices. But overall, that's impossible.
Be careful.
Absolutely impossible to say. Yeah, well, you just can't. It makes no sense to go out and put a specific number on it today. And I think you also have to consider, we're producing we've had weeks here where we have record amounts of ethanol production. Well, a lot of that is going to exports. And so we've seen a resurgence in U.S. exports. Right now, U.S. ethanol, U.S. Gulf ethanol prices are at a record discount to Brazilian ethanol prices. And so that's one thing that's provided a tailwind for U.S. ethanol in general.
One of the other biofuel issues we're waiting, and we think we could get an update on this fairly soon, is what's going on with 45Z. What are you watching for there?
Okay, so probably to back up here and help everyone out. So we have two different but yet equally important pieces of policy that we're talking about today. So at 45Z, the clean fuel production credit. So remember that this is the way that we're incentivizing domestic low carbon intensity biofuel production. It was it replaced in 2025, it replaced the long-standing $1 blending tax credit for biomass-based diesels. 45Z in 2025 was just nothing short of a disaster kind of for not only in the biofuel production space, but then as a victim of that too, we talk about canola oil demand into biomass-based diesels and soybean oil demand because the original version penalized crop-based biofuels. Today, with 45Z for 2026 forward, the credit structure changed quite a bit, and that was because of the amendments that were part of the big, beautiful bill that was signed into law in July by President Trump. And so we, with the new 45Z, it removed indirect land use change penalties, and so that put crop-based biofuels on a more even playing field with waste feedstocks. And it's effectively doubled and and in some cases, like renewable diesel, nearly tripled the value of the tax credit that you can receive by using soybean oil in the production of those fuels. And it gave a benefit to ethanol margins too, a nice boost because it does give on average an 11-cent per gallon credit for corn ethanol production. So that is the one piece of policy that's actually set in stone and we know for now. That's in place through the end of 2029. What we're waiting on though at this point would be EPA to finalize the renewable volume obligations. So you've probably heard RVO mentioned 1,000 times here lately. So we are waiting on EPA to finalize the volumes and the rules surrounding the renewable fuel standard mandate for 2026 and 27. So that's really what the market is waiting on today. It's still completely, it's completely up in the air. So EPA initially, in their initial proposal back in mid-June, they proposed substantially higher volumes of biomass-based diesels to be blended in with petroleum supplies. So soybean oil reacted very positively. One big function or kind of the way that gets us to those substantially higher volumes is because they propose this 50% RIN haircut on any foreign-derived biofuels. So they're proposing that either imported biofuels would only generate a half RIN, or any U.S. produced biofuels that are made from a foreign feedstock. So imported tallow, imported used cooking oil. They're saying that those fuels would also only generate a half RIN. And so it gave a tremendous advantage to anything that would be made from a domestic feedstock like soybean oil.
Canadian canola facing that 50% RIN haircut.
Yeah, so Canadian canola is back in the mix with 45Z because of the removal of indirect land use change. So that reduced the carbon intensity of any canola oil based fuels enough that it begins to qualify for tax credit. So that's a good thing. But yeah, it's still and with 45Z, it put that North American fence on feedstocks, and so that means U.S., Canadian, and feedstocks originating in Mexico are all considered domestic. So that is one thing that's a big question now with the pending RVO that we're waiting on. Probably the biggest question. It's not just, okay, what are the volumes, but it's the mechanics behind it. Will the administration stick with this 50% ding on anything that would be imported? Would they maybe adopt the same guidelines, that North American feedstock rule that we see in 45Z? So there are several things here that are still up in the air. And we've had a lot of conflicting reports coming from, it's every day is a new biofuel policy rumor. But I think personally, and I don't have a crystal ball, but the administration has been very clear on this America First energy policy. We saw it in 45Z. It was mentioned explicitly there in those 45Z amendments. And then when EPA released their initial proposal, I'll read you just a couple lines from it because I think this is really important. So EPA said specifically they're concerned about the increasing amounts of foreign feedstocks like used cooking oil and animal fats from China, etc. They may be displacing U.S. produced feedstocks like corn and soybean oil. And then this is where it really gets interesting. They specifically linked declining U.S. farm incomes with the influx of foreign fats, oils, and greases. So you don't hear EPA say the word farmer many times. That never happens. In fact, in the history of the renewable fuel standard, it's only been mentioned a handful of times, and it's always been tied directly to ethanol. This is the first time, though, that in EPA's initial proposal, American farmers are already struggling. This undercuts U.S. producers and so on and so forth, further harming U.S. farmers. So I think that that's probably one of the more important things to pay attention to out of this. I really feel like the administration has made it clear what their intentions are. And at the end of the day, the biggest issue with what's happened in the biomass-based diesel space the past few years is the renewable diesel boom that is a direct result of California's low carbon fuel standard. EPA really underestimated how quickly we would see renewable diesel production take off. And because of that, we have renewable diesel production that's pushed way up here, and we have a mandate that's stuck flatline down here. And how EPA is proposing it, they are getting actual production and the mandate much closer in line. And that's why you see soybean oil have a positive reaction to this. And I guess we'll see. We'll know here in a few more weeks exactly how it all shakes out.
Yeah, and it seemed like we were definitely on this path of this 50% RIN haircut, and the president met with small refiners, and then he kind of maybe we should push this back, right? So there's been some reporting out of Reuters that's been all over the place. Peter Navarro has been sending out cute little AI generated memes. Like you said, there's been a lot of mixed messaging here on what is actually what is going to be the final conclusion.
Yeah, I think so, and that's really what makes me. I guess I was kind of starting to get sucked into that camp of, maybe this is too big of a thing. Maybe they're going to pivot. Maybe they won't. Maybe they're going to get rid of the RIN haircut. And I don't know. Maybe maybe they do at the end of the day. But we have to look at what they've given us. And they exclusively mentioned the word farmer.
Yeah.
I don't remember if it was a dozen times or something in that initial release on June 13th. That's never happened before. So.
I guess the question I have, Susan, though, is that because we've seen this happen in other areas where trying to deal with China, and then that scope creeps to all geographies. And so the question may come down to, do they put a fence around North America, or do they group Mexican production or Canadian production as if it might as well be coming from China because it's all going to be treated the same. I think that's kind of a decision they'll have to make.
Yeah, and I mean, at the end of the day, the 50% RIN being, if we're talking about U.S. only feedstocks, that limits your feedstock pool in a really large way.
Yeah.
Or it really changes the economics. And so it's not that you won't still see those foreign, if it comes to fruition as it's written today, it's not that you would see those foreign feedstocks, or production from foreign feedstocks stop altogether, but it really changes the dynamics and the price structure. And I think that's a lot of why you see soybean oil here lately has started to creep back higher with this idea that, okay, we're finally going to have an answer. I don't know. Either way, there will be, anything with policy and when the government is making decisions and I mean, they're influencing markets. And actually in Michigan this morning, I was speaking to a group and my presentation deck is called "The Change is the Only Constant," but it is policy shapes markets and then markets shape agriculture. And it's a recurring theme. If this isn't anything new, it feels like it's really just been thrust into the spotlight that much more. And I think a lot of it is because the U.S. farmer is looking at the Trump administration and saying, well, we're trying to get back on track with China, or we're trying to diversify or change the dynamic a little bit because we're so reliant on export business to China. And Trump himself, he had a Truth Social post back the beginning of March of 2025. And I really think it was kind of like, the writing on the wall in my mind, because it was right at that point we were really starting to see trade relations sour with not just China, but the entire world.
Yeah.
But he specifically said, to the Greek farmers in the United States, get ready to start making a lot of agricultural product to be sold inside. And he put the word inside in all caps of the United States. I look at that as saying this is an America First energy policy that's taking shape. But that is just my opinion. So
yeah,
we'll
I remember.
see.
I think that was the week of Commodity Classic, if I remember correctly, because everybody in the media room was like, "What does this mean?" Yeah, buy bigger tractors. I think he said.
Wouldn't be the first time we've heard that.
Yeah.
But either way, I don't know how things pan out here in a few weeks when we finally get, we get some answers or some final decisions out of EPA. But markets in general on the soybean oil side of things, markets have been really positive here as we as the administration is signaling, at least we're going to have an answer at some point. Markets don't like extended periods of uncertainty because ultimately it's just a wet blanket on things. You have to open things up and let the market breathe and let the market do its job. And we have to know the policy before that can happen.
Yeah. And what about the soybean price itself? You talked about soybean oil, the future a couple times. What about the soybean future?
I think the next thing for beans is we have that initial 12 million metric tons out of the way. China has not been an active buyer since they got to the point or that first 12 was done. We haven't really heard much of anything out of them the past week and a half or so, which I don't know that it really matters. U.S. logistics are such a disaster right now as we're trying to dig out of snow and deal with low water and ice and everything else. I do think, though, that eventually, the market needs to know what's the timeline on this 25 million metric tons. Treasury Secretary Bessent, he mentioned it last week, specifically in an interview with Fox after he met with his Chinese counterpart. And I think that he said 25 specifically. Those are still numbers that China has never officially acknowledged, much less say there's an actual deal. But the market's going to start wondering, when does this happen? And at the end of the day, 25 million metric tons, I mean, that sounds great, but that just gets us back on track with a semi-normal export program to China.
We've been talking to Susan Stroud, Noble Ag. Susan, thanks so much for joining us here today. Keep up the great work. Fantastic analysis, and really appreciate you taking some time to join us as you are in transit to wherever your next destination is.
Yes.
We'll be right back on RealAg
much.
Radio right after this.
Whether you're running a farm operation, in a career within an organization, starting your own business, looking for your dream job, operating a company in agri-food, or want to hone your overall life skills, this conference is for you. Celebrating over 10 years of bringing women in ag and food together, join the Advancing Women Conference in Calgary on March 8th, 9th, and 10th. Visit advancingwomenconference.ca for more information and to register.
As you look ahead to the next growing season, there's a lot to consider when it comes to your crop. You need every possible advantage available to you. The Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com has everything you need to make the best choice for you and your farm. On-demand videos with leading industry experts available anywhere, anytime. Go into the season confident and ready with the Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com.
With deep roots in agriculture, M&P's farm management consulting team helps farm businesses make confident decisions for long-term success. From strategic planning to operational growth, M&P advisors guide farms through challenges and opportunities across Canada. Connect with M&P today to build a stronger future. Learn more at mmp.ca. Well, we're going to learn now a little bit about hybrid rye. There's a lot of opportunities with hybrid rye. It provides a lot of flexibility inside of your crop rotation, and where it really fits was when it comes to a feeding ration. And we're now going to talk to Laura Eastwood, who is with KWS.
There's a lot of excitement around hybrid rye. I myself have, back in my former career, or have grown the crop myself. There's a lot of flexibility that comes with this crop. From a feed use perspective, does it meet the mark? Like, is this something that is this a crop type? A lot of times we talk about corn and we talk about barley. Should we be talking more about rye?
Yeah, I definitely think we should be. So, you're right. Rye is extremely flexible. So we can feed it either as a forage or as a grain. So depending on which route a producer wants to go. There's options there for cattle. We see it both going as a silage and as a grain quite commonly now. On the monogastric side, so pigs and poultry, it's usually a grain, but I've even seen some pig producers feeding it as forage as well. So lots of flexibility there. In terms of its nutritional value, it's hitting a lot of the marks. It's highly digestible. It's got good protein content, and it's got a really good fiber profile, which is what we see some of our health benefits and other associated benefits from as well.
One of the things when I used to, work when I was in the seed industry, I would hear about is like, people say the same thing about like triticale, the coarseness. Is that at all a concern?
So we're not really seeing palatability issues, things like that with the coarseness as a forage. We are trying to understand what some of the limitations are on feeding with some of the research that we've been doing. But we're seeing that it makes a really good replacement up to a certain percentage of the ration. And for me as a nutritionist, I never formulate a diet to only have one ingredient anyways. Like having a mix of ingredients is actually a good thing. And so it fits quite well into our rations. Yeah.
Is there, when you look at the year and some of the research that you did here in 2025, what are some of the biggest takeaways, especially when it comes to that feed value, and what have I know some of this testing has happened actually on farm. What have growers been seeing?
Yeah, so it's been a really busy year for research on with our team, and both at the university level and with some commercial farms as well. So just very briefly at the university level, we've had a couple of projects that have just wrapped up this year. So one was through the University of Saskatchewan, and they were doing both grain and silage for feedlot cattle. So they did backgrounding and finishing cattle, trying to understand what the inclusion levels would be, how the cattle respond to that. At the end of the day, they basically say that, we can feed it to all stages of cattle production without a problem there. Their recommended intake levels are about 30%, replacing barley, either silage or grain, is what they tested against. And we're hoping to do some further research where we compare it to some of the other cereal grains as well.
And again, sorry, go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, one of the barriers that I think a lot of people have in their head when they hear about, like, say, hybrid rye and from a feeding standpoint is ergot. And some of the, and so have we, I guess, how big of an issue is that? And if so, how are the genetics mitigating against it?
Yeah. So, I've been a livestock nutritionist for a long time now. And even if you'd asked me 10 or 15 years ago, would I feed rye to pigs or cattle? I'd probably say no. Now I work with KWS. We're in a very different ball game. So our genetics have something called Pollen Plus technology that's built in with all of our lines. And that creates a significant amount of pollen during the flowering phase and reduces the risk of ergot spores from being able to get into the head of the plant. And so that significantly reduces the risk of ergot overall for that crop. But at the end of the day, nutritionists and producers like to actually see data, and they like to actually know what they're feeding is going to be safe for their livestock, because ergot can cause some significant health concerns. And so what we did this year is we collected samples from all across Canada. We collected 25 samples from Alberta through to Quebec, and we tested them. There's two types of ergot tests that you can do. One is the standard percent by weight test that most grain elevators, feed mills use. It's very quick, it's cheap, it's easy to do. And basically it's just counting the visible ergot in a set amount of sample. And so it's very easy to do. The other test is what the nutritionists like to use, and it's measuring what the actual toxic levels are. And so they don't always correlate, which is a bit of a problem. So a feed mill might say, yeah, we'll accept up to a certain percent by weight, but the nutritionist might have a totally different set of values in terms of the ergot alkaloids, and they don't always match up. So it creates some challenges. So this year I collected all these samples, and we've analyzed every sample for both things. And it's given us a set of guidelines that we can now use for recommendations for nutritionists and producers. So if a percent by weight test comes back as 0.1% or higher, I can automatically say that's not going to be a great feed option. I'd highly recommend it go into a different market, like have it cleaned, go into milling and distilling somewhere else. But if you had to feed it, then test for those alkaloids, understand what's actually going on, and go from there. But if it's below that 0.1% by weight, then it likely makes a good feed ingredient. But we still want to understand what those alkaloid levels are. So a nutritionist would likely still test to make sure that they feel comfortable and know what's there. And so we're building this database, like we started this year, and we're going to continue to do this year over year, so we can be a leader and have that information available for nutritionists and producers to build confidence in the crop. We found that over 90% of the samples we tested this year, of our KWS samples, were acceptable for feed. They were good. So the only ones that we found that were not were actually in areas where they had severe drought, and then they had a lot of rain, and they had a big second growth of that crop. So they had two flowering stages. The Pollen Plus technology didn't work as well, which is expected in that type of a situation. And so those crops we recommended go into a different market and away from the feed market. But those were the only ones where we saw any challenges. Everything else from Alberta right through to Quebec was good to go. So
that's interesting. We're learning a lot more about ergot, right? And it's that information is power, especially from a feeding perspective, because people want to make sure that they have feeding options, but also don't want to make sure that they're not harming the livestock from what's in the ration perspective. So that's fascinating.
Yeah. It's a very complex topic, and there's a lot of moving parts, but we're working with livestock nutritionists and researchers. We're working with Ag Canada and trying to build relationships there to build more of a database on what's going on across the country. And KWS is supporting that in however we can as well.
Yeah. What about from a forage perspective? We were just kind of talking about, from feeding from a grain side of things, but what about from a forage perspective?
Yeah, so similar to taking grain samples this year, I also took a lot of forage samples from across the country, and we ran those to do some nutrient analysis testing. And we did basically from Alberta again to Ontario in this case. And we divided them into 3 categories. So we looked at early cut, mid cut, and late cut samples. And to really try and hone down the difference between when the forage is cut and what that nutritional value is. And we're going to continue to do this again year over year. We're working with our plant breeders in Germany as well to really try and understand this to even more of a fine detail. But all with the goal of helping producers on that flexibility side. So maybe they want to make a decision that, they need to plant their second crop on a specific day. This data is going to give them that information to say, okay, this is what the nutritional value of the rye would be if I had to harvest it a week earlier than that, right? And flip side, if they wanted to look at a specific nutritional value, they can understand when they might need to actually harvest that. So that's what we're trying to build. What we found, so the early cut samples, most of those were cut early in May in Ontario, and they were about 17.5% crude protein. They had a really good NDF digestibility value, great feed for lactating dairy cattle, for example. The mid cut, that was more the boot stage, and they had about 15% crude protein. Again, good digestibility, good feed product. And then that late cut, that was more Western Canada, so Saskatchewan, Alberta, and they were cut sort of end of June, beginning of July, much lower crude protein content, about 10%, with lower digestibility, which is what we expect. But we're going to put all this information together. It'll be available on our website and our technical materials very soon, so producers will be able to use that as a tool.
If a nutritionist or producer, if thinking about hybrid rye for the first time, whether that's feeding or forage, what are the things that maybe the introductory things it should do, and maybe even more importantly not do? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah. The optimal is, it's really going to vary depending on, whether you're a cattle feeder or you're a pig feeder, whether you're going for grain or forage, what your objectives are. But I would say that, the initial goal is to get the crop off to a good start. So you really want to make sure in the fall that your field is ready to go, that you have, good seeding, you had a good plant stand, and that's going to set you up for success, with your program the following year. It's going to help dictate the higher yields. It's going to reduce your ergot risk by focusing in the fall on getting that plant in properly. And then when it comes to the feeding side of things, rye is a fairly new ingredient in North America for a lot of people. And for me, it's about trying to build comfort. And so I would say start low. If you're hesitant, Don't include it at 50%. Include it at 10% of your ration. Start low, see how it goes, see how the pigs respond. Get your nutritionist to build some comfort formulating with it as well, and then gradually increase the amount that you're using. And that's what most producers have been doing, is they kind of go in at 10-15% on the grain side, see how it goes, and then increase it. And even on the silage side, we see that a little bit, start to blend it in and then increase the amount. So that's one thing. The mycotoxin testing is a big thing. So not just ergot, but understanding what all your mycotoxins are. And I recommend this, whether it's corn, barley, wheat, the hybrid rye. Know what your DON levels are, know what your ergot levels are, because then you can actually formulate a ration properly and not have those negative impacts to the animals. So those would be the big things. And at the end of the day, give it a try. Like, it's something new. It's a new tool in your toolbox. It's kind of exciting to have something new in a toolbox, and we don't get that a lot of the time. So
there's just so much flexibility, but I think that's the intimidating part of it for a lot of people is that there's so much flexibility that it's like it feels like there's complexity, but there's not. It's just you have a lot of options.
You do, and like this year, for example, the weather was very different all across the country, and we had some people that had every intention of they had a field, they were going to take it for grain, and experiencing dry conditions in the spring, they decided it probably wasn't the best idea, and they actually took it for forage, and they got a really good forage crop off of it, and then planted something else after, right? So, but they made that decision in the spring. It wasn't a pre-planned decision, but having a crop like this gives you that flexibility and the ability to make those decisions if you need to. So.
Yeah, and if somebody has been using, say, winter triticale in their program, it's a pretty easy option to switch to hybrid rye, right?
Yeah, so one of the dairy farms that we worked with in Ontario, one of the commercial farms, they planted half of their field with our hybrid rye and half with their winter triticale that they usually use. And so the triticale went in at a much higher seeding rate than ours. The cost per acre and the yield per acre was actually very similar between the two fields. The biggest difference was the earliness of harvest. So they were able to get the hybrid rye off the field 9 days earlier, which meant that was 9 days earlier they could get their corn in the ground after, and then reap the benefits of that on the back end of the second crop. So, it's even in Western Canada, we see the same, about a week to 10 days earlier versus the winter triticales. The consistency with the hybrid rye is really good as well. So I often tell people that it's like riding the kid roller coaster versus the adult roller coaster. When it comes to yield or when it comes to crude protein, our peaks and valleys are pretty small with the hybrid rye, whereas some of the other crops, you get big swings depending on the weather conditions, and you don't always know what you're going to get. So you might one year get a higher yielding triticale, but the next year you might not, right? Whereas the rye is much more consistent.
And you've mentioned pigs several times. Is that because of the sensitivity in the feed ration, or just hit on that, because I've heard you mention hogs several times?
Yeah. So in Europe, about 65% of all the hybrid rye that's grown is actually feeding pigs. So it's the main market for feeding there. And so it is a very large market here. We're seeing more and more pig producers becoming interested in it, especially if they're growing their own crops and milling on farm. It makes a really good fit for them. But even some of the bigger feed mills are starting to trial with it a little bit across the country and get some experience with it. So pigs really like it. There's some health benefits that go along with pigs. We have a research project that's just wrapping up in Quebec, and they actually saw less aggression in their group house sows, which is something that all of our farms are having to move to if they haven't already done that yet in Canada. So to have sows that are less likely to start fights and more likely to walk away from a fight is actually kind of a cool thing, right? So there's lots of other benefits that go along on the pig side that people are really interested in.
That was Laura Eastwood of KWS. Okay, if you have any feedback on today's show, we heard from Premier Scott Moe, we heard from Susan Stroud of Noble Marketing. I want to hear from you now. Send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also call or text the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Thanks, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Radio. And we'll talk again tomorrow. Cheers, everybody.
Thank you for downloading this RealAg Radio podcast, brought to you by Intruvix 2 herbicide from FMC. Intruvix 2 herbicide for cereals delivers outstanding control of the toughest broadleaf weeds like volunteer canola, narrow-leaved hawksbeard, and kochia. See your local retailer.